Good morning, or nearly afternoon. I'll keep this fairly brief. It's always fun being the person that's between you and lunch. So this will be the least medical discussion of the day, I think. I think that's safe to say, and I'm kind of used to that spot, as Joe put me into a nanotechnology conference a couple of weeks ago, and I was the odd one out there too. So we've talked about data. We've heard a lot about data so far this morning. Where's this data coming from? And how is it collected? How is it stored? How is it encrypted and saved? How is it then analyzed, processed, and delivered back to the industry? This isn't just a biomedical and pharma-based problem. This is a global problem. And when, over the last 5 years, this emerging device technology theme has come across, called the Internet of Things, one of the aspects that I've been talking about a lot over the last couple of years is it's not about the Internet of Things, it's the Internet of Data. And I think that's very consistent with the conversations that we've heard so far this morning. So IoT, let's talk about it a little bit. If I can make this thing work. All right, so this was 2005. Computers and therefore the Internet are almost wholly dependent on human beings for information. This was 11 years ago. That is already no longer the case, and the pace of change, the rate of change, is just accelerating. The Internet of Things and things will monitor, control, analyze, and optimize our world. This goes beyond the qualification of drugs. This goes beyond the qualification of things that exist today. This goes into the point where there will be personal and environmental and global sensors collecting data about multiple aspects of our lives. When we think about how many individuals there are in the world and how many million smartphones there are, maybe with the exception of a few Samsungs as of this morning, clearly we can see with a population of 7 billion people, we've got 4 billion by 2020 that will be connected. This is staggering when you think of that proportion of the global population. However, the number of devices that people like Ericsson and Sony and others are talking about is that there will be 50 billion devices connected directly and indirectly to the internet, gathering data for us, about us, with us. And clearly the data that they are accumulating is petabytes and needs to be processed somehow. So this is a challenge, and a lot of the work that we do at the Entity Group is consulting with companies that are scratching their heads. And as Tom White and I discussed at the break, the fascinating thing for myself and for our team is that I'm a telecom hardware guy by background. I ran the sourcing and supply chain group at Sony Ericsson locally. I didn't think I would be sitting in the middle of a medical audience or an energy audience or a defense industry audience. And these are places I find myself every day of every week right now. Connecting everything to everything else, figuring out what to do with the data that results from that and how to use it to make better decisions is crossing over all of these areas. And 10 years ago when I moved to North Carolina in RTP, one of the observations I made was I had lots of neighbors where we had to talk about the weather because I'm not into sport, so we couldn't talk about sport. Religion's never a safe topic. Politics, well, don't get me started right now. So we didn't talk about anything other than weather or gardening maybe, okay? You had defense neighbors, medical neighbors, energy people, telecom people. Today, the Internet of Things is a reason for RTP to talk to each other. And we're solving the same science problems in different industries with different jargon, but at the end of the day, it's about the data, the analysis, and how to leverage this for everybody. So 1.9 billion IoT products today. So okay, it's here. And some of the examples are impulse buys. You walk into Best Buy and your money's burning a hole in your pocket and you buy something with almost no ROI. Okay, I'm buying it, it's gonna be in a drawer and I know it's gonna be in a drawer in 3 months, but I buy it anyway. It's yet another smartwatch, it's another device that's maybe giving me some information, but does it change my behavior? Does it change the way I react to my environment or to the world? Is it critical? So we talked to the CEO of Fitbit at one point a couple of years ago at a conference, and their comment was that they tried the leave behind test. If you leave your house without your wallet, your watch maybe, depending on your age, your car keys, then you come back for it. Over the last 10 years, you've no longer left home without your smartphone or your phone. You've come back for it. If you go out without your Fitbit, if you go out without some of these other connected devices, Bluetooth headphones that I don't leave without, okay, there's a few of these, but very rarely have we got to the point in a consumer ROI that we have to have these devices. Industrial ROI is much, much stronger because somebody had to sign it off, and it wasn't my wife. So I'm not sure why the transition's not working, but it's fine, it'll help me speed it up. So IoT is not about turning off the lights. It's not about figuring out if I can, I have the Hue light system that Philips have offered, and there's software that you can do disco lights. My kids love that. And they change colors and all sorts of stuff. But you do it once, and then you think that's cool, and you maybe do it once every 6 months. It's not a life-changing method. From a light perspective, those lights I can set a geofence so that as I get home, I never enter a house that has no lights on anymore. That's a safety aspect. This is a big deal. That's where it starts to get interesting. But the aspect that we think is really interesting about this from a data perspective is now Philips, and as a result, Google and others know when these lights are going on and off. When you start to think about this from a big data perspective, you start to realize if you have just got home, that means the grid needs to know that you're about to consume energy. It means that the utility industry needs to know that you're about to be consuming water from the water supply. This cloud aspect becomes a big deal for everybody. The other aspect is if I just got home, or more importantly, if I just left home, it's kind of important that I know that I left home, and only people I trust know that I left home, because my house is now empty. So security system or not, I have an empty house. So the encryption and the storage and the professional management of that data is absolutely critical. And of course, from a medical perspective, it's even more critical if that data is about me and my health and my conditions. So connected the unconnected is not the real value. It's connecting all these things about us. You know, we drive cars that may or may not gradually become much more connected. If you've got, in the Bay Area, for example, if you're driving a Tesla and you're commuting for an hour to 2 hours each way, then the place that you are static the longest during your day is your vehicle. It is already and will continue to be filled with sensors. It can monitor your health much more frequently and much more accurately than a 3 to 6 month checkup at the doctor's. It's a different environment, it's a different method of gaining continuous data about you and about your environment, and an early warning trigger in a way that data has never been seen in the past, because it has been a one-time event. However, a little bit of a problem. So only 8% of the companies today involved actively in IoT are actually doing enough with that data. We did a large project with a company in New York. We had all of the software work done by a team, a very experienced team in Bangalore, India. And when we went to meet with them, we had a day-long presentation. The last piece of the presentation said, last minute, let us bring another team in to have a discussion about data. They brought in a team, and they explained that they had basically taken the statistics faculty from the local university, and they had brought them in to reprocess the data that was being wasted by their top customers. Their top customers will say, we want to process this data from this project, and we want the analysis resulting from that. And what this company realized was the amount of analysis that was being done was a very small fraction of the available data. They were leaving money on the table because they were just scratching the surface of what the analysis really is. And I think that's really common, that what we see in IoT is that whether it's in medicine, in energy, in telecom, or in defense or other areas, the amount of data available, the processing of it, and the better decision making is just not yet being taken full advantage of. More so, conversely with the 8%, IDC commented that 73% of companies, all industries, have either deployed or plan to deploy IoT in the next 12 months. So you've got this massive disconnect. All this data is going to get collected and very little is going to get done with it. This is a step change. And part of the reason why it's a step change is that most industries do not collect as much data as the medical industry does. And more so, they don't do anything with the data that they're collecting in the first place. So this is a massive challenge. It's a crossover between industries that never, ever had to think about this before. So here's an example. Imagine this, Facebook, 1.7 billion users, active on a monthly basis. Imagine if your medical sensors, if your environmental sensors, temperature sensors, sensors in your Bluetooth headphones were taking account of your pulse, your blood oxygen, other metrics. Every time you're on a phone call for 2 hours or an hour, it's capturing data much more regularly than if you are capturing it with a medical professional. As a result of that, it's being shared in a community that you already trust. You've already given up your privacy. You've given up your permission for that privacy in a shared environment. You get to the stage where you could have a very large amount of sensors creating a huge amount of data and a trusted portal that allows a community to grow where your medical data is now shared in a very, very viral way to improve your health and your support. Even to the extent of gamifying this, to the extent that if you're adding your data to a particular aspect, it will change the way you're operating in the industry. As I mentioned, Bluetooth wearables, vehicles, homes, all connected, all have to be safely connected and safely encrypted in that respect. Video architectures are supporting telemedicine in a very different way than has ever been seen before. And this will change the way that we think about our health. In the US, we are consumed much of the time by thinking about medical insurance in ways that other countries that have social medicine really don't focus on it to that degree. The team that I ran at Sony, we ended up spending a lot of time on wellness. The reality with wellness is it's an event leading up to the time when the insurance is renewed and the claims and the underwriters look at how much of a risk you are and your team. Video support, telemedicine, connected health, and wellness become a way for companies to actually change their profile and their employees' profile. Another example on medical devices, I'm on the board of a UK company that was an MIT spin-out. They started out deciding or realizing that through research they discovered that asthma and COPD triggers result a few minutes after the trigger in a series of coughs. So in order to determine that to turn things around from a trigger, they could detect coughs. They're now in the process of building that into smartphones so that the always-on feature of most smartphones over the last couple of years with their microphones, they're listening related to a Siri or Google Now. They're listening also for coughs. Now, that's really interesting from an indicative perspective for a child or for an adult, for their caregiver. But imagine if you've got 100,000 of those asthma sufferers in Beijing. Based on pulling all of that data together, you've not only helped that one individual to improve their outcome because they've been alerted that a trigger just happened and they need to do something about it and take their inhaler, but you also see the cloud, the pollution cloud, the physical cloud, the actual cloud, because this data acts as 100,000 canaries in the mine shaft, alerting the population, alerting the organizations and the facilities in that country and in that city to change the outcome. This becomes a big deal. Urban development, traffic planning, there's lots of other impacts from this based on triggers that we think we're using socially. Fitbit knew the seismic magnitude of the earthquake in Southern California, or no, Central, I guess, California 2 years ago, before the seismic research body did, because they knew that all these people just got woken up and they could see the epicenter based on who got woken up first. This is an unintended consequence of gathering all this data and processing it. Not sorry about the logo there. So on the other hand, we've got to be real careful with some of the unintended consequences. Johnson & Johnson, this was an article I pulled up a couple of days ago, is warning that insulin pumps potentially can be vulnerable to cyber hacking. This is a protected environment, but it needs to be controlled in a very, very careful way. In most industries, regulation follows innovation, not the other way around, which means there's a gap. That gap causes a problem for the industry. And when you get a crossover between the medical industry or the energy industry and areas like wireless, where it's unknown technology, it's unknown regulations, and in some cases science, this is a problem. So, for example, we have seen a number of companies that have had unintended consequences of radio frequency interference because they built a medical device that never had to comply with the FCC, that never had to fall into the situation where it was broadcasting or receiving radio frequency energy and then causing a challenge between the operators. These are areas that companies are not taking into account fully yet, and this will be quite a big transition. We work with a group up in Wake Forest that's called the Wireless Research Centre, and they do a lot of defence and telecom testing, and now actually medical testing of antenna design. If you look at antenna designs, just when people talk about 4G and the mobile services that we use in most parts of the world these days, I think at the moment there's like 60 different network standards, network frequencies around the world. So you build one device, one phone, it's got to comply with 60 different sets of frequencies and criteria and approvals around the world. If last week you were making a medical device, now you're making a thing that from that perspective is now a smartphone. There are huge amounts of unintended consequences. So one of the aspects that we focus on is looking at the comparison between the consumer and industrial. Back to my comment about ROI, industrial tends to have a much more thorough based in terms of its case study, in terms of its ROI and its protection. Think about the data, build the business and the service not as a standalone device. If you don't understand components of the connectivity, find someone who does. When we were at Sony, we had a team of 4,000 people in around the world working on these aspects. We're seeing medical device companies, energy companies, defense industry companies where they have a very tiny team, if any team, understanding some of these topics, and this is a problem. Also think about tapping into why do you care about it. We've all got used to smartphones and devices that are easy to use. If your device and if your suite and your application is not easy to use, people are going to challenge it in a way that they can't take it out of the box. You buy an iPad, there's no instructions. You hand an iPad to a 2-year-old, they know how it works. It just works, it's intuitive. We need to make the user experience consistent with what we've become used to as personal devices. But also think about how you're mortgaging your own information. There's a creepy factor, okay? When I talk to my parents in the UK about, okay, well, I've got all of my information on my location and my location history, and I get free maps, and it's like, okay, I'm mortgaging my information because of the benefits it gives me. Okay, I'm leaving here by Uber because Uber already knows physically where I am. It knows what time my flight is, etc., etc. That's way over the other side of the creepy line as far as my mum's concerned, right? She doesn't want anybody knowing all that stuff, even though there's maybe other benefits. So think about that creepy line as you're working with customers. I've kind of read through this slide ahead, and I know we're out of time, but I want to highlight that I see RTP as a hub of sorts for very different reasons than it was 10 years ago. I think this is a big deal. Talk to your neighbours. If you're not into sport like me, then talk to them about industry and IoT. It's a big deal. I definitely believe this area has to grow some in the funding and the media aspects. And in that regard, we're doing some work in that regard to help. So this is about real needs, real product, real data, and real value. Figure out how this crosses over and becomes real business for everybody. As I mentioned, as well as the entity group, we've just started a seed fund, $10 million seed investment fund, deliberately to try and support early stage companies in this area. We feel very strongly that the Internet of Things is a way to unite people, even if it's not about things, it's about data. Thank you very much.